watching Alabama Crimson Tide football recruiting on BamaInsider.com. My name is Trey Hannity. Thank you for being here, everybody, for another Tuesday night edition. Joined, as always, by best-selling author with 18-plus years of experience in the recruiting world, the man himself, Andrew Bone. Andrew, how you doing tonight? We got some big news to talk about right away. Obviously, a huge decommitment out of Los Angeles on Sunday. But how's your past week been? And, this news with Damani Jackson, how did that find you this weekend?
Yeah, it's been good. I mean, obviously, we're less than a month away from the early signing period. Things are starting to heat up. And, we know Alabama's currently sitting with 19 commitments and, not a lot of spots left. I still think there's probably going to be anywhere between, 9 to 10 more kids join this recruiting class. That's not to say there's going to be 29 commitments. I think there may be a few that end up falling out of the class, end up going elsewhere. But I still think there's probably about 9 or 10 more guys that will end up in Alabama's recruiting class at some point over the course. Maybe not before this early signing period, but either during the early signing period or maybe some will wait until February to decide. But it's starting to get really interesting, and we're going to be talking about a lot of those guys this evening. And we just knew kind of going into the season that just kind of wait, let things kind of play out. Let's see how things go with not just Alabama. We know how things typically go with Alabama. It's all about a lot of these other schools, and we've seen a lot of coaching changes already. We've seen coaches on the hot seat. We've seen different teams fall flat on their faces, and it's really opened up the door for Alabama with a lot of these recruits that they have been recruiting for a long time, but opens the door up even more for them now moving forward.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Guys, hit that like button for me as we get into the show tonight. Get your comments in there. We're going to take your questions at the end of the show. Bone will answer all of those. But, of course, a lot to talk about tonight. Before we get to that, Alabama now maybe in the driver's seat for the number one defensive back recruit in the country. Damani Jackson announced he was decommitting from USC. And like you said, some crazy coaching changes out on the West Coast there maybe led to this decision. But, at this point, is Alabama in the driver's seat to land this recruit?
Well, I think they are. He did take official visits to Alabama and Michigan this fall, and there was some talk about Michigan a little bit. He liked Michigan growing up, but was always a kind of a diehard USC fan. And we knew when he took that visit to Tuscaloosa back in June and spent 3 days at Alabama, there was some optimism. And I think with Alabama, they just wanted to make sure that they got him back on campus for an official visit, which they did a couple weekends ago for that LSU game weekend. And things were just, as good as they possibly could have been for Damani and his family. And he ends up reopening his recruitment on Sunday night. This was about a week after he came home from his official visit to Alabama. Now, he's come out and said that it's really an Alabama USC recruiting battle. Now, this was really kind of before he decommitted. Michigan's still in the mix a little bit, but in the end, I really like Alabama's chances here. I still think he's going to wait and see who's going to be that next head coach at USC. But the clock is ticking, and there's not a lot of time left between now and the early signing period when he does plan on signing his letter of intent. So you got to really like Alabama's chances there. And I think Jay Valai, Alabama's new defensive backs coach, has done a tremendous job recruiting him. Damani said this a few months ago in an interview that he talked to Coach Valai just about every single day. They were texting, messaging on social media or calls. So you knew when he said that the interest there with Alabama was very real. It wasn't just a once a week type of thing or, once every couple weeks. This was an everyday thing. And once he came in to Tuscaloosa, felt the love, saw the, all the fans, saw the stadium, filled to the brim. I mean, and he mentioned this. He mentioned, going to USC games is just a lot different because it's not packed out. There's not a lot of fans there. There's not a lot of excitement, for the Trojans, and there hasn't been for a very long time. You can probably trace it back to the Reggie Bush years when people were really excited about USC and going out and seeing the games and seeing all the celebrities there and all that kind of stuff. I used to remember watching those USC games and who's going to be on the sideline tonight. And I think that's what was exciting about USC, along with everything else that came with it. But you know what you're getting with Alabama. You're going there to play football, to develop, and potentially go is in the first round of the NFL draft one day. And that's his goal. I mean, that's what he wants to do. He doesn't care about all this other stuff. He wants to be an NFL football player one day. He wants to have success at the college level and be the best player that he possibly can be. And that's why Alabama is right up there, right there at the top of his list. And I think they end up getting him when all is said and done.
I'm right there with you. And it's just so crazy to think that, the one-time powerhouse in Southern California can't get these guys to stick around anymore. We're going to keep an eye on Damani Jackson, but some other defensive back targets for Alabama still out there. Some guys we already have comments in about tonight. Eric D talking about Damani Jackson, but also talking about Denver Harris and Earl Little Jr. What's Alabama's mindset on these guys now that Jackson has reopened his recruitment, and how focused are they on getting these two to Tuscaloosa?
Yeah, I think if you go on just about any message board outside of an Alabama board, you'll see different comments. Oh well, Alabama's no longer recruiting this guy or that guy. They're still recruiting the same guys. Nothing has changed at all. Alabama might have 3 defensive back commitments right now, but if Denver Harris and Earl Little Jr. want to jump on board along with Damani Jackson, guess what Alabama's going to do? Guess what Nick Saban's going to say? Come on in. They're going to welcome all 3 of those guys into their recruiting class if all 3 of them want to join. They've recruited all 3 of them for a very long time. As of right now, I feel probably better about Damani Jackson and Earl Little Jr. right now, just because Denver has kind of just slow played his recruitment. It's not necessarily other schools that have slow played him. It's more Denver has kind of put a halt on his recruitment. He suffered a torn ACL during his junior season, so he's missed most of his senior season, but finally got back on the field about a month ago. So he's really been focused on his high school football team. He's got a chance to make it to the state championship this year. I think he's really been focused on that. Now, he's been planning on making a trip to Tuscaloosa this upcoming weekend for the Arkansas game. Haven't been able to confirm if he's still going to make that trip. Things are, a little difficult to get from Houston to Tuscaloosa, for a 2:30 kickoff. I'm not sure if he was planning on flying or driving, but sometimes it's a little bit more challenging for recruits to get to Tuscaloosa, especially if it's not an official visit. So Alabama's not paying for this trip. He's already taken his official visit back in June. So even though he may not visit Tuscaloosa, he's as of right now we think he's visiting. But if he doesn't visit, I wouldn't take that as a sign Alabama's out of the race or anything like that. Sometimes it's just a little bit more challenging to make it over to Tuscaloosa after a Friday night football game. So we'll see if he ends up making it. But Alabama still very much in the picture for Denver Harris. I still think Alabama is in the driver's seat for him right now. And, we'll just have to kind of wait and see how it all unfolds in the end. But would not be surprised if we saw all 3 of those guys in Alabama's class. Alabama's pushing for all 3 of them. Alabama wants all 3 of them. Now, there's still some other defensive backs that are out there that Alabama would certainly welcome in for an official visit. Devin Moore, who's committed to Notre Dame. Alabama's still been in communication with him. Toriano Pride, who's committed to Clemson. Now, probably hasn't been as much contact with him as there probably has been with these other guys, but there's a lot of interest. Clemson really doesn't like for their commitments to take any other visits. So that's something that Alabama would have to, try to get around. But as of right now, not really expecting anything with him. But, those other 4 guys, Earl Little Jr., Denver Harris, Damani Jackson, obviously we're going to be watching them closely, and we'll see if Devin Moore ends up making a trip up to Tuscaloosa or not.
We will. It'd be huge to get all 3 of those guys. And like you said, with Denver Harris, a little bit more confusing with his recruitment. One thing that is not confusing at all is Chill Will's love for BamaInsider.com. Another super chat tonight. Thank you so much, man, for always being here, getting in the comments, supporting the channel, and just being yourself. Roll Tide to you. Right back to you. But like you said, another big weekend for Alabama as far as the visits go. Maybe not as big of a weekend with New Mexico State in town, but you broke some news on Friday that big-time Rivals 100 prospect was going to be coming into town. This time it was Anthony Lucas. He made his second trip to Tuscaloosa. What were your thoughts on this trip, and how big is it for Alabama to get a guy like this in town?
It was huge. I mean, this is a guy who Alabama has recruited for a long time. We reported on Friday morning that a big visitor was coming in. We weren't allowed to release that news until Saturday once he stepped foot on campus. But Anthony Lucas, big defensive lineman out of Arizona, made his trip back to Tuscaloosa. This is the second weekend in a row. He had also visited for that LSU game. So I thought that was huge for him to come back. Now, the situation was a little different. This was the LSU game was a visit that he had planned since the summer, since he had taken his official visit. And then he came back with a friend of his whose family decided to come in to see their daughter, who is on the dance team at Alabama. So Anthony hopped along and decided to come back to Tuscaloosa and see Alabama. But he was in town for 24 hours. Got a chance to spend some time with the coaching staff once again. A lot of people have just made this assumption that he's going to Texas A&M, and I think a lot of that's because he did take 2 visits to College Station this fall. Likes Texas A&M a lot. And I think Texas A&M is certainly a top contender. I think they're probably top 2 with Alabama, but getting him back on campus again, very big for the Crimson Tide. They're heavily recruiting him. They want him as a part of this recruiting class. I think Alabama more than likely is going to end up with 2 more defensive linemen in this class. Lucas is a guy I really think that they're going to have a great chance to sign. Now, his recruitment's not over yet. I mean, he's still planning on taking a visit out to Oregon. He's going to wait until, these in-home visits happen in December. So Nick Saban's going to go out there in December, sit in his home with his family and really try to win his recruitment. So that's when the recruitment's going to be won, when these coaches go in for these in-home visits in December. But I think Alabama's going to have a great chance to land Anthony Lucas. Been to Tuscaloosa 3 times now, and they're showing him a lot of love. Another interesting thing is he's recently come out and said that after football he wants to go into coaching, and he says, "Well, is there a better place in the country than the University of Alabama to learn under that coaching staff?" So I think that really helps Alabama's chances. I'm not going to make a prediction on him just yet, but I do think Alabama's got a great chance to land his signature.
That's great to hear. And like you said, I mean, no better place than Tuscaloosa to come and learn if that is his future aspiration to be a coach. One thing I love about this time of the year, there is so much going on. And right now we have a recruiting show, but a little bit of a schedule change up this week. The college football playoff show is going on right now. So the rankings are being released. We're going to transition into a show covering all of that once we get wrapped up here. But guys, keep getting those questions in for me. We're going to take those at the end of the show. Couple more questions to get to with you, Bun, before we do that. Curtis Perry announces he's going to be coming to town for Arkansas this weekend. An in-state guy and a guy that has his commitment date set for December the 15th. Now, like I said, a trip this weekend. Do you see that date maybe moving? Could he announce his decision a little bit earlier than we expect?
Well, it's possible. He did announce that he was going to make that commitment on December the 15th, with that same top 5 of Alabama, Auburn, UCF, Clemson, and Texas. Now he's going to be taking this official visit to Alabama this weekend. Could he potentially pull the trigger this weekend? I think it's certainly on the table. With Alabama, really trying to, finish strong in this recruiting class, and with not many spots left. And obviously we know Anthony Lucas is a top defensive line target for them. They just recently picked up another defensive line commitment in Isaiah Hasting. So does that maybe put a little bit of pressure on Curtis Perry to go ahead and make that decision? It might. We'll just have to kind of wait. But he's having a tremendous senior season. I think he's up to 20 sacks on his senior season, which is incredible. Just led his team to a big playoff win. So he's going into the 3rd round this upcoming weekend. And, I'm sure he's excited about the game, plus getting down to Tuscaloosa for his official visit. So big weekend for Alabama to get Curtis Perry in town. I like Alabama's chances with Curtis Perry. I've liked him for the last several months, really kind of since the season started. We'll see if he ends up taking some other visits, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if he made that decision after this weekend.
Yeah, that would be a big advance on it, but certainly something Alabama hopes for after this Arkansas weekend. Crazy enough, already the last home weekend of the season. Season has certainly flown by. And, for Alabama at the beginning of it, Le'Veon Moss was committed to the program. He decommitted and has now picked up a new school. Texas A&M is where he has announced his decision. I saw some comments earlier asking about this. I want your thoughts on this decision and, your thoughts on Alabama's position now. Do they go after another running back in this class?
Yeah, not surprised by the commitment at all. Le'Veon Moss, his recruitment's been kind of, just not wild. It's been kind of hard to follow just because he doesn't talk to any media. Nobody really knows what's going on in his recruitment. I remember when he committed to Alabama back in June, it was kind of out of nowhere. Everybody thought that he was a strong LSU lane. Took his first visit to Alabama, committed. That wasn't the guy that we were expecting to commit to Alabama that weekend, and he ends up making his decision. And then nobody ever talked to him. He never did any interviews with anybody about his decision. And we saw him posted on social media at all these other schools throughout the rest of the month, including a couple trips to Texas A&M. So when he decommitted from Alabama, it wasn't really that big of a surprise. Now, we knew that Alabama was still recruiting him, still liked him a lot. Try to get him back in town for another visit, which he did. He visited for the LSU game, but still, I don't think Alabama ever really felt like he was going to end up back in their class. They liked him. They would have taken a commitment from him, but did this catch Alabama off guard at all? Not at all. They're still heavily recruiting Jamarion Miller, Texas. Longhorn commitment, been committed to Texas since the summer. Took a kind of a quiet official visit to Alabama back in October for that Tennessee game weekend, and I think there's been a lot of buzz around him since that trip. Javante Barnes out of Las Vegas has also taken an official visit to Alabama this season. I don't think Barnes is going to end up in the class, but I'm continuing to watch Jamarion Miller. I think everybody needs to continue to watch him. This could be one of those recruitments where, he doesn't say anything, keeps everything quiet all the way until signing day, and then bam, he flips his commitment. Kind of like what we saw with Jace McClellan a few years ago. And we saw that last year with a couple other recruits, including JoJo Earl. Could that be a similar situation with Jamarion Miller this year? It just might be. So that's something that we're going to watch. We're not predicting it just yet, but it's something that we are watching very closely, and we think Alabama's going to have a really good chance to potentially flip Jamarion Miller from Texas.
We're certainly going to keep an eye on it. And as we close out the show here, guys, continue to get those questions in. We're going to take those after we talk about our commitment of the week. But first, I got to talk about Chill Will again. This guy, one of the biggest supporters we have here, such a great cheerleader, and I'm with him. He says, smash that like button. It's free and it helps the channel. Thank you guys for supporting, and thank you, Chill Will, for another super chat tonight. Cannot thank you enough for all of the support. Your commitment of the week, a guy I got to see play this summer, a guy I was really impressed with, 5-star defensive back Sean Murphy. Talk about this story and what you were excited for this past week.
Yeah, Sean's having a tremendous senior season. I think, he's really improved in, every facet of his game. I think he's, really kind of living up to that 5-star billing. Alabama was really impressed with him during the summer. And, they also, kind of like what they wanted to see, with every other kid in their recruiting class. They want to see how they performed on the field during their senior season. And he has been absolutely lights out. I think he's been, really impressive, and, certainly somebody that Alabama coaches are very excited about his future. He's actually going to be making a trip back to Tuscaloosa this weekend. Had a great game last week, and that's why we named him our commitment of the week. Had 10 tackles, had a blocked field goal, and had a pass deflection that was returned for a touchdown in a 49-35 win against Patriot High School. So big win for him in the playoffs, and Sean Murphy was named our commitment of the week.
That is a big week for Sean Murphy. Great to hear it. And guys, the top 5 now getting announced. Georgia, of course, again at number 1. Alabama at 2. Ohio State at 4. Oregon again at 3 there. Cincinnati now up to 5 in the poll. We're waiting on number 6 and 7. Like I said, we're going to transition after this show into a show talking about that a little bit more, kind of breaking down the new poll. But before we do that, I want to take your guys' questions now. Not as many tonight. So guys, if you want to keep getting them in as we answer them here, feel free to do so. But let's start with Jarvis in McNair. He wants to know who else Bama has a good chance of flipping at this point.
That's always the question. Who's on flip watch? We've already seen 2 of Alabama's top targets already decommit. Including Damani Jackson and Shamar James. So those are certainly guys that that I think Alabama's going to obviously continue to heavily recruit. And I think they got a chance to land. In terms of offensive guys, man. Obviously, we just talked about him, Jamarion Miller, who I feel like Alabama's got a great chance to land. I saw a report that Mike Farrell came out and said that he felt like Travis Hunter was going to flip to Alabama. I actually didn't read the report, but someone sent me a kind of a screenshot of it. I don't think Travis Hunter is going to flip from Florida State to Alabama. That's certainly a guy that they would love to have. They've been in communication with him this football season. Alabama actually went out and watched him play earlier this year, but he hasn't really shown, much interest in terms of taking an official visit or, really even flipping. He's been very, very solid to Florida State kind of throughout the whole process. So really don't see him flipping to Alabama or Georgia or wherever else. I'm sure every school in the country is trying to flip him, but I think he's going to stick with Florida State. Obviously, Keontae Goodwin, the big Kentucky offensive lineman, that's certainly a guy that Alabama continues to heavily pursue. They would really welcome him into this recruit class. But as of right now, still committed to Kentucky. He took an official visit to Florida State this past weekend. He's going to go out to Texas A&M actually this weekend, and then make that decision sometime in December. But obviously, Keontae Goodwin's still a top target for the Crimson Tide. Those are kind of the main guys that are out there. We mentioned Devin Moore, the Notre Dame defensive back commitment that Alabama's trying to get on campus for an official. Toriano Pride, who's committed to Clemson, that would be a welcomed visitor for Alabama if he decides to make a trip back to Tuscaloosa. He actually camped, both of those guys camped at Alabama in June. So, if they can get them back on campus, they're going to have a shot. So those are kind of the main guys in terms of, flip candidates or at least guys that they're recruiting who are committed to other schools right now.
Yeah, love getting to the flip question. A little bit more ambiguous. We'll narrow it down here. Talk about a specific player. And Kevin Coleman, Corey Cox wants to know where he stands right now. Originally, it seemed like he was leaning a little bit more Alabama. Now some Florida State into play. Does Alabama still have a chance here?
Well, Alabama's not really recruiting him. They haven't recruited him for a long time. Everybody's always mentioned him as a top target for Alabama. I probably mentioned it back in the spring, but really haven't talked about him really ever since then. He never camped at Alabama. So Alabama hasn't seen him. They're not recruiting him. They've really kind of shifted all their focus on other targets. I know, he's come out and said recently that, Alabama's still in his top 5, but they're really not. They're really not a contender at all for him. And I would certainly expect him to go elsewhere. The focus has been on these other targets. Alabama's got some really good wide receiver commitments already, and Kobe Prentice, Aaron Anderson. You can probably count Amari Niblack as a wide receiver commitment, even though he's kind of a jumbo athlete. But the focus is really on Shaz Preston and also Kendrick Law out of Louisiana right now. I know I saw a question about Evan Stewart. I just think Evan Stewart's going to stay in the state of Texas. He hasn't returned back to Tuscaloosa this season. I don't think he's going to, and I think for the most part, he's going to end up staying in the state of Texas. I would probably lean. Yeah, I was probably leaning Texas a few months ago. He's made a few visits to Texas A&M in the last month. So, maybe the Aggies end up winning there, but I wouldn't necessarily call this a recruiting win for, Texas A&M or Texas over Alabama. It's going to be a recruiting win for Texas over Texas A&M, or a recruiting win for Texas A&M over Texas, because I just don't think there's not really much going on between Evan Stewart and Alabama right now.
Yeah, may come down to a battle there in state in the Lone Star State, but we'll keep an eye on it there as well. Now, Schneid787 or Schneids, I don't want to mispronounce it here. They want to know about safeties, where Alabama's recruiting right now, and kind of specifically a little bit more about Sam McCall, potential flip there.
Yeah, Sam McCall is committed to Florida State. There was a lot of talk before his commitment to Florida State that he was leaning towards Alabama, but I just don't think Alabama made that really strong push. Somebody said on our board a month or so ago that he did an interview and said that if Alabama started recruiting him and started pressing for him, that it would be hard not to flip from Florida State. I don't think I ever read the report, but I guess it's out there somewhere. Alabama just hasn't really gone after him. They got a couple safety commitments right now. Antonio Kite, who the staff is extremely high on, and believes he's probably, he's not rated as a top 2 safety, but you go look at the Alabama recruiting board, he's probably in the top 2, if not top 3. They love this guy, 6'2", about 185 pounds, played basketball all the way up until his only played basketball all the way up until his junior season, moved over to the defense side, or moved to football and started playing defense. And, man, was he something else, and has been spectacular, or was spectacular during his senior season, especially on the offensive side of the ball. People just didn't throw to him on the defense, when he was on the defense. But this is a special kid. Jake Pope at Buford High School, one of the top high school football programs in the country. I think Alabama coaches are also very excited about him. You have Traquan Fagans, who's rated as a cornerback, but in my opinion, could also be a safety. He's, right at about 6'2". Might be even taller than that. 185 pounds. So you got three guys that can play safety. Then you got Earl Little Jr., who Alabama, obviously is, very strong after, and I feel like is going to end up in the recruiting class. And this is a guy that can play all three defensive back positions. So, I think Alabama, coaches are really excited about him, and the belief that he will be a big time contributor in Alabama's system if he ends up picking the Tide. So, I think Alabama's pretty set at the safety position.
I think they're all right there. We'll get to a couple more before we close it out here, guys. And as we do, continue to hit that like button. It's as simple as clicking one button on your screen. And while you're at it, go check out the rest of the YouTube page. We have a lot of content out right now covering the season, the world of recruiting, and everything you need to know about Alabama football. Couple users now asking about Shamar James. Alabama's chances there.
Yeah, I think we're going to get the Shamar James question each week on what he's going to do. This is a big in-state target for Alabama. A guy that we all felt was going to commit to Alabama during the summer, and then bam, commits to Florida. Now we knew that Alabama wasn't going to stop recruiting him, and obviously we've seen kind of what's going on down in Gainesville, and he decommits. But as we know, Georgia has become a really strong contender in his recruitment. He was going to take an official to Georgia this past weekend, ends up not taking that visit, ends up going over to Alabama. And, that was 2 weekends ago for the LSU game. But he is going to take that official to Georgia in December. And I think, that's a visit that a lot of people are going to be watching really closely. If he can get out of that weekend without, being committed to Georgia, then Alabama's going to have a great chance to land him, because I think it's the weekend before that early signing period, and that's always a tricky weekend. Some kids end up coming off that emotional high. We saw that several years ago. I remember Cyrus Kwanjo. Everybody thought he was going to Alabama. I mean, his parents thought he was going to Alabama. He took the official visit to Auburn the final weekend before signing day and announces for Auburn on National Signing Day on ESPN. Of course, he ends up signing with Alabama a couple days later, but going on these visits the last weekend before signing day, there's just such an emotional high that these kids have, and you just don't know how it's going to go. Sometimes it works good for schools, sometimes it doesn't. So we'll just have to kind of wait and see. It's an Alabama-Georgia recruiting battle all the way up until the end. It's going to be a dogfight, and I think Alabama's obviously got a great chance to land him, but so does Georgia. I think they've really made a strong impression. He's got a really good relationship with a lot of players there. But Alabama in-state school, and he's got some connections up in Tuscaloosa. He's really close friends with Alabama linebacker Deontay Lawson. They've obviously talked a lot about playing alongside each other for a long time. So we'll just have to kind of wait and see what happens. But no prediction just yet on Shamar James. It's Bama or Georgia.
It's going to be a heated battle, and Chill Will continuing to bring the heat along with Vegas, man. A couple more super chats. You guys just keep getting in here and keep bringing the energy for us. We cannot thank you guys enough. That money goes a long way to helping our channel do what it does and getting Bone on here to give his thoughts every Tuesday night. Thank you guys again. Vegas, man. Chill Will, as always. To close it out tonight, I want to talk about a guy we really got to touch on.
Vegas, thank you.
Yes, sir. And, these two great commenters as always, and you guys we have to applaud as well for getting some excellent questions in tonight. And to close it out, I want to talk about Marvin Jones Jr. We went into it pretty extensively last week, but an update after New Mexico State weekend.
Yeah, Marvin Jones Jr. is certainly a big target for Alabama, and there's all this talk after going down to Florida State and seeing this epic win against 5-5 Miami team that he's all of a sudden heavily favoring the Seminoles. Now, I don't think that's going to really move the needle for him. I think that the reason he likes Florida State so much is because he grew up a Florida State fan. He grew up, not watching his dad play, but knowing about how his dad was, this Florida State legend and great, and certainly a lot of people just kind of expect him to go to Florida State, and he likes Florida State. I mean, he likes the coaching staff, wants to see the program do well, but at the same time, it's a struggle city down there. I mean, they've got a lot of things to still work on. You can't just beat Miami and all of a sudden become this great team. You got to. There's a lot more that goes into it. So does that help? We'll have to wait and see. But I think, in the end, it's going to be a really tight recruiting battle once again. Alabama, Florida State, Oklahoma's in it. He came out of the top 5, but I really think those are the 3 schools that are really fighting for him. Georgia is also in the mix, but I'd be surprised if he goes to Georgia. I think Alabama's got a great chance with him. Teammate Earl Little Jr., I really like Alabama's chances there. Wouldn't be surprised if Earl's probably recruiting him to join him. He's best friends with Dallas Turner on Alabama's football team, so I think that helps a little bit. But it's certainly a tug of war all the way up until that early signing period when he makes that decision. But Alabama's going to have a really very realistic chance. And I've seen some reports that have come out that said Alabama's starting to fade a little bit with him. That's just kind of bogus in my opinion. It's not true. I think it's really an Alabama Florida State battle. Oklahoma's there, but I think in the end, it's Alabama or Florida State.
Yeah, I like the take there. Win over Miami in a different era would have meant a lot more, but they do beat them this weekend, and a good experience for Marvin Jones. Going to be a fun one to follow, and it's been a really fun show tonight. Thank you guys for being here. Hit that like button, getting in the comments as always. My name is Trey Yanity. That is Andrew Bone. We're going to be back next Tuesday, a little bit earlier. We're going to go at 5 p.m. so we can get that CFP show for you guys. But now we're going to try to do that tonight, get the CFP going. Like I said, guys, thank you for joining us. Be back next week. For Andrew Bone, Trey Yanity. Roll Tide.